And now it's week 2. Should mean that all of you who are listening to this have survived week 1. And we're going to be looking at vegetables and fruits. We're going to be, for the next few weeks, looking at different types of foods and how they influence our physiology and our health. And I begin with what hopefully will come through to you as an attempt at humor. Fruits and vegetables provide a rare case of unanimity, or pretty close to unanimity, about their health-affirming value. There are many different foods and nutritional approaches where there's controversy. Fruits and vegetables pretty much are not part of that. It is widely understood in the nutrition science community, among practitioners who have studied nutrition, that fruits and vegetables are good for you. So there's a photo, I love this one, of wild berries from Alaska, from our friends at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. All right, so let's look at nutritional content first. Most fruits and vegetables, high fiber, low fat. There are exceptions, but most of them fall into that category. High nutrient density, low energy density. That is to say, relatively low calories per nutrient. They are generally good sources of vitamins and minerals, and I've got a quote here from this Wallace study, this comprehensive umbrella review, which is a required reading this week. So one thing Wallace and colleagues said was that fruits and vegetables, they're good for you, they're sources of vitamins and minerals, and they vary widely in nutritional contribution, density, and dietary bioactive content of a standard serving. Not all fruits and vegetables are the same. One of the ways that their values can be measured is in terms of their ability to help with oxidative stress conditions. So there's a measurement called oxygen radical absorbance capacity, and that's a live link there, the ORAC, which will take you to some charts of which fruits and vegetables or which other foods have high ORAC values or not. So it basically measures antioxidant strength, and there are many fruits and vegetables that have particularly high ORAC values. I've got a list here. I'm not going to read them all, but the list really focuses on different types, green, orange, yellow, red, blue, crucifers, which in some ways, crucifers and leafy greens, from my point of view, merit being their own food group. So, as you've probably heard it said elsewhere, eat the rainbow. Here is a systematic review from a decade ago, or a critical review, which concluded that the strongest evidence for prevention, the conditions, the diseases that are most directly helped by increased fruit and vegetable intake are circulatory diseases, including hypertension, coronary heart disease, and stroke. There are other diseases that also benefit. It's all sorts of different preventive effects, but those 3 circulatory diseases have the strongest evidence. On the other hand, fruit and vegetable intake, according to research, does not directly influence developing diabetes, but it's correlated with preventing weight gain, and the preventing weight gain is an important risk factor for diabetes. So fruits and vegetables are beneficial for preventing or managing or reversing diabetes. So the The conclusion from this study, national campaigns to increase fruit and vegetable consumption are justified. You're used to this. I mean, this is not a surprise to you. Here is a more recent 2017 meta-analysis showing that more fruits and vegetables leads to lower all-cause mortality. And all-cause mortality it's the ultimate summative, that is to say, final stage outcome. You know, did you die sooner if you had fewer fruits and vegetables? That's what this is about. So fruit and vegetable intakes are associated with reduced risk of cardiovascular disease, cancer, and all-cause mortality. That's strong information to be aware of. So it's a meta-analysis of 95 studies. And there is a decreased risk of cardiovascular disease and all-cause mortality among those consuming up to 800 grams a day of fruit and vegetables combined. That's several portions. And for cancer, once you got above 600 grams a day, having more, at least in this data that they're accessing, having more did not make it more likely that you wouldn't get cancer. But fruits and vegetables are preventive for all of these conditions. So, and there are more specifics that I want to just show you. In part to share this important data, and in part to just emphasize that when we look at systematic reviews and meta-analyses, this is in many ways the highest level of evidence. So, within this, when we sort of dig down a bit deeper, inverse associations were found. That is to say, when you have more of these foods, you have less of these conditions. It's preventive for them. So inverse associations found between apples, pears, citrus, green leafy vegetables, cruciferous vegetables, salads, and the cardiovascular disease and all-cause mortality. And then there's a connection to cancer from green and yellow vegetables and crucifers. There are some statistics there. I'm not going to read every single word on all of my slides. You can check that out. And here's another systematic review. Fruits and vegetables and risk for specific diseases. This is 2019, a systematic review of meta-analyses. This is in the Journal of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, what used to be called the Journal of the American Dietetic Association before they changed their name in about 2011, if I remember correctly. So, good news. Fruits are associated with lower risk of various cancers, stroke, and all-cause mortality. Absolutely good news. Vegetables are associated with lower risk of various cancers, heart disease, and all-cause mortality. So there's a little bit of difference between the fruits and the vegetable impacts here, a fair bit of overlap, and that the main benefits, this is interesting, the main benefits statistically in these studies come from having the first 200 to 300 grams a day, like maybe 2 servings. Now, we are probably all aware at this point that in the United States, and it's probably true to a reasonable extent elsewhere, there's a campaign that everyone should have 5 servings of combined fruits and vegetables in a day, which usually is seen as 3 of vegetables, 2 of fruits. But this is saying that the difference between having 2 servings, you didn't reach 5, but you reached 2. Not ideal, but there's a big difference between having 2 servings and having 0 servings, or having 0.5 servings. You will have patients and clients who are closer to the 0 to 0.5 place. They just didn't grow up eating this, never developed a taste for it. That's a gigantic problem nutritionally. There's not really some pill, potion, or powder that is going to be a good substitute for this. Okay, so various good news, just reported it. The bad news, certain formulations of fruits and vegetables are problematic. In general it's good, but canned fruit intake. And you have to remember, the vast majority of what they're talking about here is it's canned and there's a whole bunch of sugar or some added sugar. So, canned fruit intake is associated statistically with increased cardiovascular mortality, that is dying of heart problems, and all-cause mortality. And pickled vegetable intake is associated with increased stomach cancer, probably due largely to salt. This is, epidemiologically, it's particularly relevant in East Asia. Places like Korea, Japan, where there's a high salt diet and pickled vegetables are very popular. Okay, and frankly, diets in most industrialized countries, we may not have in the United States the same higher levels of stomach cancer that they may have in, let's say, Japan, but we've got our own problems. So this is not we're good, they're bad. So this study. Take a look at this. So this is about the effects of fruits and vegetables in lowering all-cause mortality rates. That is to say, helping people live longer and healthier lives, right? This is a 2022 study. They're looking at 3 large population studies encompassing, you see the numbers up here in the first bullet, 137,000 women, 23,000 men, from 3 different cohort studies, ongoing cohort studies. So, among the many things that the data from these studies showed, but the one that these authors are focused on is that compared to those who consumed less than 1 serving a day of fruits and vegetables, so low fruit and vegetable eaters, if you compare them to those who have 4 or more servings a day, there's a benefit in terms of all-cause mortality and various other, outcomes, cardiovascular, as we've said before. So if they're having low pesticide residue, that was the term used in this study, that is to say organic or something in that direction, fruits and vegetables, they have a 36% lower all-cause mortality risk compared to those, if they're having 4 of low pesticide compared to those who have 1 of low pesticide. But when you look at people having high pesticide fruits and vegetables, that is to say, conventional foods, all-cause mortality is only 7% lower as opposed to 36%. And what they concluded from that, and please take this in, because frankly, when I saw this study, this is the most powerful study I have seen yet. If you've got something more powerful, let me know. But this is an extraordinarily powerful study on the value of organic foods. They said that this means that the exposure to pesticides through diet may offset the beneficial effect of fruit and vegetable intake on mortality. Now, fruit and vegetables have a very strong influence when they're included in substantial enough amounts in the diet. A very substantial influence on those outcomes we've been talking about, all-cause mortality, cardiovascular, and so on. Cancer, too. This is basically saying that the use of pesticides, particularly higher amounts, because they're comparing the ones who, have really high pesticide versus really low pesticide, which is how these are often formulated, in quartiles or quintiles or tertiles. Okay, they're saying this pretty much wipes out. The pesticides basically wipe out the life-extending benefits of fruits and vegetables. Okay, I've said my piece on this. Give it some thought. Something else about fruits and vegetables. This is an article from Rui Hai Lu, who was then at Cornell. He's moved on to another university, I think in the Midwest, about the synergy between phytochemicals, plant chemicals within plant foods, and in this case, fruits and vegetables. He says there are no silver bullets. It's not like there's one single nutrient, one single component that is the answer to all of this. He's saying it's very difficult to pinpoint specific constituents responsible for the effects of fruits and vegetables. It's not that difficult to pin if you're a world-class researcher like Lou and others who I'm citing are. It's not difficult to show that fruits and vegetables bring these improved outcomes. It's way the heck more difficult to show exactly which components of them within them are responsible for that. And what he's saying, it's the interactions among them all. And this leads to some additional thoughts and conclusions. First, do not ever assume that the whole is the sum of its parts. I mean, there's a quote from, I think, Aristotle that deals with this. But basically, the whole is more than the sum of its parts. Do not ever assume that you have identified all the parts. Yes, in the 2020s, we know a whole lot more about many different biochemical and different kinds of constituents of fruits and vegetables and other foods. But, I mean, way more than, 30, 40, 50 years ago. There are things that we talk about all the time now that were not talked about in health professions training institutions in 1970 or 80. There's been a tremendous series of steps forward. So, still, does that mean everything that there is to be discovered has been discovered? If we now know of, and I'm making up the number just for as an example, let's say we know about 100 different constituents of blackberries. Does that mean that's all there is? No. Just as there were many that had not yet been discovered a generation ago, I think it's very reasonable to conclude that there are many that haven't been discovered yet. So be open to further developments. Rui Hai Lu, whose work I greatly respect, he recommends 5 to 10 servings a day, not 5, but 5 to 10 servings a day of fruits and vegetables, and also strongly recommends that if you're trying to get antioxidants, get them from whole foods rather than supplements. We will see some examples of supplements being beneficial, but in general, supplements are supplementary. They're not the main course. And as I mentioned earlier, eating the rainbow is a popular term these days. I like it myself. And usually that refers to eating a wide variety of different fruits and vegetables and other foods every day. I mean, this is a health establishment position. This is not some outlier position. Since 1991, the U.S. government recommends at least 5 a day of combined fruits and vegetables. In the United States, we fall far short of that, unfortunately. The American Heart Association recommends 4 servings of fruits and 5 of vegetables. They recommend 9 on their website. I gave you a link here. This website defines what constitutes 1 serving. Like a medium-sized peach, is 1 serving. Whereas to get 1 serving of asparagus, you have to eat this much, or celery, or whatever it might be. Okay, so eat the rainbow. Plant foods contain fiber. There's an interesting story behind this. When I first started teaching nutrition back in 2007, I would tell this story about Dennis Burkitt, and it was news to virtually everyone in my class. The story has spread since, so there's less dramatic impact when I tell it now. But for those of you who may not have run across this previously, let me tell the story in condensed form. So Burkitt he had won the Nobel Prize in medicine for what is called Burkitt's lymphoma. he went on a medical, he was from London, UK. He went on a medical mission to Africa, I believe it was Uganda. And when he got there, he found that in stark contrast to his clientele in London, nobody in the community where he was practicing in Uganda had constipation. And so, being a Nobel level mind and researcher of great curiosity, he thought, why is this? And basically he concluded, this is where I condense, he concluded it was fiber. And because Burkitt, the Nobel laureate, wrote articles in major medical journals in Western countries, and people respected him, this whole notion went mainstream much more quickly, I think, than it otherwise would have if it was just, John Smith, non-Nobel laureate, who was writing these, even if the information and the data was equally valuable. These things matter. Okay, so adequate intake for fiber is generally around 25 grams for adult women, 38 for adult men. This is largely based on research that demonstrates protection against coronary heart disease. That's not the only benefit from fiber, but there we are. Eating more can be fine. That doesn't mean eating infinite amounts are essential or will not, in some cases, cause a bit of discomfort. But in the United States, the mean dietary fiber intake is 17 grams a day. Only 5% of the population reaches those recommended levels, that adequate intake level. And let me add 2.5 grams of fiber per serving of a food qualifies it as what's called a good source on the U.S. nutrition facts labels. And 5 grams qualifies it as an excellent source. The Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, again, this is the largest body of licensed nutrition practitioners in North America and perhaps the world. A&D recommends that people achieve adequate fiber intake by first, increasing the intake of plant foods, and second, decreasing the amount of energy, that is to say calories, from foods high in added sugars and fat, which in general will also be low in fiber. Suggested sources for fiber that they explicitly call out: whole grains, legumes, vegetables, fruits, and nuts. And they recommend, this is a position paper of the Academy, messages supporting this should be broadly supported by food and nutrition practitioners. And basically what that means is tell your patients and clients about this. As to a little more about fiber in foods, fiber is contained in the cells and cell walls of plants. You've studied this before. I'll be brief. There's no fiber in animal foods. Processing of plant foods can diminish fiber. So brown rice has more fiber than white rice. Whole wheat bread has less fiber than white, or what's sometimes called wheat, as opposed to whole wheat or 100% whole wheat. So a couple of questions. One is wheat bread a whole grain? Answer to that is clearly no, because what is called wheat bread in the United States can have a whole lot of white flour in it. But diving a little deeper here, is 100% whole wheat bread considered a whole grain food? Actually, I thought this was on a slide here. Maybe it's elsewhere. The Canadian Dietary Guidelines and the U.S. Dietary Guidelines differ on whether 100% whole wheat bread is considered a whole grain food. The U.S. guidelines say yes. The Canadian guidelines say no, it should not be considered a whole grain food, but it's good for you anyway. Continuing. Canned and frozen fruits and vegetables contain just as much fiber as raw. I mean, nothing's been taken out. Drying and crushing can diminish or destroy the water-holding qualities of fiber, even if the total grams of fiber stays the same, or pretty much the same. Removal of seeds, peels, and hulls reduces fiber content, not a surprise to you. And as a result, to just put this in a good example, whole tomatoes have more fiber than peeled tomatoes. Peeled tomatoes have more fiber than tomato juice, etc. Now, juice still has some fiber, but way less. Benefits of fiber, I mean, the most famous one is preventing or treating constipation or hemorrhoids or diverticulosis, those lower bowel issues. I would add that there are other influences on constipation that are not related to fiber, generally related to sufficient fluids and perhaps to sufficient oil. Water-soluble fiber helps decrease blood cholesterol levels. Fiber helps with weight control. I mean, it gives you a feeling of satiety or fullness. Okay, if you're full, you don't want to eat that much more. And you probably will therefore avoid certain high energy density foods, high calorie foods. A little bit more water-soluble fiber, which is inside plant cells, slows the passage of food into the intestines, helps regulate blood sugar, does not significantly increase fecal bulk, though. Where do you find water-soluble fiber? Beans, oat bran, fruits and vegetables. Insoluble fiber is from the cell walls of plants. It does increase fecal bulk, speeds the passage of food through the digestive tract. Whole grains and the bran portion of whole grains, which can sometimes be added to a product, and in other cases it would be within the product, like the whole grain wheat or rice or quinoa or whatever, from the beginning. Vegetables and beans also contain insoluble fiber. Okay. Examples of the amounts per serving, typically, of different food groups. Beans and legumes are at the top, 7 or 8 grams per serving. Whole grains, 4 or 5. Fruits, typically 3 to 5. Here's a question for you. Why would blackberries have higher fiber, 8.0 grams, than blueberries? Same quantity. Both nutritious berries. Why the difference in fiber? And if you answered that the reason is that the seeds, the high fiber seeds of the blackberries are within the fruit that you eat, whereas blueberries don't have those high fiber seeds inside, that's the reason. And you, therefore, I will therefore award you an imaginary gold star. Vegetables, 2 to 5 grams a cup. You can see examples. That Mayo Clinic link gives you more examples. What about cooked or raw fruits and vegetables? Key point here is that some nutrients are more bioavailable when they're cooked, and others are more bioavailable when they're raw. So there's not one single answer like cooked is better versus raw is better. It depends. Key example is that cooking boosts the lycopene, which has all sorts of health benefits. It's the red color in tomatoes and other red-colored foods, tomatoes being the most widely eaten. Other examples where cooking increases nutrient level bioavailability. Carrots, spinach, mushrooms, asparagus, I'm not going to read the whole thing, more antioxidants when cooked. Interesting. On the other hand, vitamin C, water-soluble vitamins, are very subject to destruction or partial destruction from heat. So, for example, steaming or microwaving cause less loss of vitamin C than boiling or frying, which are higher temperature. So raw is best in some cases, cooked is best in other cases. You don't have to arrive at one single answer to the cooked versus raw question. Now, there is the juice or don't juice question. And this too has influences pushing in both directions. So juices have less fiber than whole fruits. Not as good. As well as higher levels of sugars and more calories per ounce or gram. Also not good. In large studies involving nurses, people who ate whole fruit, especially blueberries, grapes, and apples, had less type 2 diabetes, which is obesity related. Those who drank fruit juice were, as opposed to eating whole fruits, were at increased risk. And people who swapped their fruit juice out in favor of replacing it with whole fruits 3 times a week cut their diabetes risk by 7%. Okay. Now, on the other hand, juicing helps the body absorb more of certain nutrients. Many studies have shown, beta-carotene is exhibit A here, that the juiced version of fruits and vegetables increases beta-carotene absorption above that from the whole food, like carrot juice, for example. By the way, I show that Champion juicer there because that was my first juicer. Mine was yellow, not black. I worked in a health food store long, long ago in Venice Beach, California, and I could get a big discount on it at a time when money was scarce. And I got it, and we juiced a lot. I'm not telling you that this is a better juicer than some other brand. I'm not here selling Champion juicers. I do not have a stake in the company or in your choosing it over something else, but it's a nice memory for me. So processing fruits and vegetables may break down the cellular matrices of the food, which makes antioxidants more available for absorption. Okay, so basically, because so many people are not meeting the recommendations, not meeting the needs for fruits and vegetables, not reaching the goals for either, and they're resistant to changing their habits, in cases like that, I think there's a case to be made. You may or may not want to make that case yourself, but I think there's a case that is credibly made that juicing can help people who are resisting to eating whole fruits and vegetables. And if they get the nutrients that way, it's better than not having fruits and vegetables at all. So it makes it easier to include a wider variety of vegetables. You don't have to have pure carrot juice. You can have carrot and celery and parsley. And, a lot of people wouldn't eat parsley alone, or depending on how adventurous you get, garlic or ginger. So, I don't have juices much. I don't avoid them completely. I dilute them when I use them, but I'm pretty much an advocate of having the vast majority of fruit and vegetable intake come through cooked or raw whole foods, whole fruits and vegetables. Take a look at this. I found this surprising. You might too. So, okay, we've got a cohort study. 13,000 black and white adults, 45 years and older, observed for 6 years, which is a while. So at the beginning, they excluded those who already had known coronary heart disease, stroke, or diabetes. Here's something they found. First, each additional 12-ounce serving per day of sugar-sweetened beverages, soda, sweet drinks, etc., heavily sugared coffee or tea, was associated with an 11% higher all-cause mortality risk. That's kind of an eye-opener. It's the next one that I found shocking. 12 ounces, same amount, of 100% fruit juice in this group of people, this is published in JAMA, was associated with a 24% higher all-cause mortality risk. That the 100% fruit juice had a worse effect than the sugar-sweetened beverages. I'm not sure entirely what to make of that. It is not really clear to me what the underlying mechanisms are, but that is a very, very interesting finding that I wanted to bring to your attention. Also, definitionally, in the U.S., unless the label on a fruit beverage, unless it says it's 100% juice, there will be added sugars, so read the ingredient list. Perhaps avoid both. Any liquid that is called a juice drink, juice cocktail, punch, sparkler, blend, or beverage is not 100% juice, and in some cases, hardly any. You know, after that last slide, which is a fairly new study, I think it's not so much juices versus juice drinks as it is juices and juice drinks versus whole fruits. That's the real foundational question. That said, if you take a look at the potassium. These are nutrition facts, labels in the U.S. from 100% pure orange juice on the left and 10% juice on the right. The orange juice that came from oranges, 450 milligrams per serving. The orange drink, 10% juice, 0 potassium. I think they're each problematic in their own ways. Okay, I want to move now to what are now called food components of public health concern in the 2020 to 2025 U.S. dietary guidelines, the current ones. So there used to be categories that previous guidelines used called overconsumed nutrients or shortfall nutrients. They have been combined into this food components of public health concern. So what are they right now, according to the dietary guidelines? So first, from infancy to old age, most people need more fiber, so this would have been called a shortfall nutrient before. More fiber, more vitamin D, more calcium, more potassium than they're currently having. And they need less sodium, saturated fat, and added sugars. Those are the findings of the U.S. Dietary Guidelines writers. In addition, certain groups need more iron. You may have come across this before. Adolescents, premenopausal women, pregnant women, breastfed infants. Good to know. Pregnant women need more iodine and folic acid. I'm not going to go into all of that and all the details right now, but that's very widely known, although it is not known to all women who become pregnant. And there may be instances where you're mentioning it to someone who comes to you as a patient or client or just who you meet somewhere. That information can be extraordinarily valuable to that pregnant woman and her child-to-be. All right, I'm going to move from topic to topic here because fruits and vegetables is a very broad area. So I want to talk about leafy greens. Dark leafy green vegetables, in my humble opinion, may merit being considered a separate food group. They are extraordinarily nutritious. They are strong in all sorts of nutrients, vitamin A, C, K, calcium, fiber, and more. I assigned videos, short-ish videos, from two nutrition-focused practitioners who, one of whom applies a whole food plant-based diet, the other of whom applies what's essentially a paleo diet. So these have overlap but differences. Both Esselstyn and Walls have people eating large amounts of leafy greens, up to 2 pounds a day, as part of their reversing disease strategies. In both cases, they have had some real success. So I'm saying to you, you can see the red type to emphasize it, if you do not yet eat, if you, not just your current or future patients and clients, if you do not eat dark leafy greens fairly regularly, and I'm not going to define that in numbers, please be sure to explore ways to enjoy them. I mean, you may find that if you just boil collards in water for a half hour, you're not thrilled with that as a new food. But there are all sorts of good recipes out there where flavorings that will make it enjoyable to you have been tried and tested by cookbook writers and others. Check it out. Dark leafy greens are wonderful. I grow them. My wife and I grow an organic garden. Leafy greens are a big part of what we love to harvest there, as well as buying them at a farmer's market or at a grocery store. Organic, if at all possible, which, at least in Portland, it usually is. Okay, so dark leafy greens are a good source of calcium, 100 to 250 milligrams per serving, which is more or less a half a cup or 4 ounces of cooked vegetable. Greens, this is important if you're dealing with vegan or vegetarian patients or clients. Greens are central to non-dairy, whole food based strategies for getting enough calcium. So, in addition, we need calcium to be present, which it is in all leafy greens, particularly dark ones. But it also needs to be bioavailable. And some greens have good amounts of calcium, but very difficult absorption, and you can't get access to the calcium except in small amounts. So examples of these particularly oxalate-limited greens in terms of calcium deliverability, spinach, that's the most famous, beet greens, and chard, sometimes known as Swiss chard. Those are high oxalate. They're good foods. They're just not good sources of calcium. Kale is low oxalate. Its calcium is somewhat superior in terms of percentage of absorption, somewhat superior to cow's milk. There's a good reference. Collards and mustard greens also low oxalate. And I'm not limiting it to these. There may be lesser known greens that fall into both categories. Here's an interesting racial disparity with regard to leafy green intake. In the United States, 8% of whites have up to 2 to 3 servings of dark leafy greens per month. 85% of African Americans have that much. Different food cultures, different strengths and weaknesses. This is one where the African American diet, or the foods that African Americans are eating, is, in terms of leafy greens, far superior. So 2 to 3 servings of kale or collards per month is associated with a 50% lower risk of glaucoma compared to 0. And the African Americans are having that, are far exceeding that. And as I mentioned, Esselstyn and Walls, those doctors recommend having that much, not per month, but per day. So there's a wide range of leafy green intake in the U.S. and various other nations. We can be part of increasing it. And so, as part of our leafy green education, I want to ask you to play Name That Green Vegetable. So, what's this? Have you seen it before? Isn't that a beautiful color green? Those are collard greens. This is curly kale. This is lacinato kale, also known as black kale or dinosaur kale. Probably because of that sort of ridged, I don't know how to describe it, that almost reptilian look to the leaves. You don't see anything like that here on the spinach, on the high oxalate spinach, as compared to the low oxalate kale. Here's broccoli. And that what we're looking at, there's the stem, but there's also their flower there. All right, so let's look at some fruits. Apples. We all know about apples, but how much do we know about apples? Did you know, for example, that they originated in Central Asia? A whole large number of different varieties, large, small, all sorts of different colors. Apples are a good fiber source, 5 grams per serving. Strong antioxidant activity, which is not very much related to their vitamin C content. Boyer and Liu, and this is the Rui Hai Liu who I referred to earlier with regard to phytochemical synergy, they wrote a piece in 2004 showed that an apple has 5 milligrams of vitamin C, but its antioxidant activity is equal to that which would be gleaned from 1,500 milligrams of vitamin C. So, again, the interaction among the many different constituents of any food and the combined foods within a dietary pattern is an important thing to consider. Not just the reductionist view of, wait, it's low in vitamin C, but, well, what are we looking for in terms of judging how healthy is this food? And the ORAC levels, or antioxidant activity levels, that's a good way of looking at least this single part of nutrition in plants. These are cranberries. I remember raw cranberries in the northeastern U.S. where I grew up. They are native to North America. Usually consumed, or most frequently, as a juice. Mixed juices, like, because cranberries are fairly bitter. So usually there's some kind of sweetener. There's some apple juice or grape juice or maybe sugar. Cranberry sauce is also famous for being part of Thanksgiving meals and others. Cranberries are hard and bitter, generally need to dilute them, like I just said. They contain moderate amounts of fiber. They've got some vitamin C. They've got manganese. They are particularly rich in proanthocyanidins, which are a phenolic phytochemical. And to bring this more down to the practical rather than the biochemical, they are used frequently and have a reputation, deserved or undeserved, and we'll get into that in a moment, a reputation for being of use in urinary tract infections. Now, there's a Cochrane review on this which says that there's no benefit to using them for urinary tract infections. And I want to talk a little bit about Cochrane reviews because you will see them. The Cochrane review, which was started by a Scottish epidemiologist named Archie Cochrane, is a database that has literally hundreds and hundreds of thousands of randomized trials. And they appoint panels to evaluate what conclusions can be reached from these. They look at the quality of the trials. They look at the strength of evidence and so on and so forth. Okay. Massive database. I did an interview. This is optional reading. I interviewed Brian Berman, who was the founder of the University of Maryland at Baltimore Medical School's program in complementary and alternative medicine back in the early 90s. I met Brian at a integrated medicine conference in D.C., and we got to talking, and I did an interview with him a little while later. We talked at one point, wasn't the main focus, but we talked about the Cochrane reviews, and check that out. I'm not going to go into what we said, but basically the conclusion is that I asked him, my sense is that the Cochrane reviews set the bar so high that you hardly ever see anything where the conclusion is, yes, this is really highly effective. And is that true, or am I misjudging? And he says, yes, you have that absolutely right. And it's intentional. What the purpose of these reviews is to distinguish the small number of cases where we can say with a high degree of confidence that yes, this is highly effective, as opposed to the far more common situations where the evidence is either mixed or not quite as strong. And anyway, if you want to, when you have time, and I'm not wanting to overload you too much with assignments, but I also don't want to hold back things I could share with you. So it is optional. So let's look at some non-Cochrane evidence. Here's an article from 2013 saying that, yeah, there are mixed outcomes from clinical studies on cranberry products. These are the result of testing a variety of products, often uncharacterized in their composition of bioactives, using different doses and regimens. You know, is this pure cranberry juice? Is this cranberry powder mixed in water? Is this a heavily sugared cranberry drink? And these studies, run the gamut of that spectrum. So, and the absence of a biomarker for compliance, that is to say, can you measure, for example, vitamin C levels in the urine to see if people were actually having any fruits and vegetables, perhaps including cranberries? Okay, so here is a systematic review with meta-analysis looking at clinical trials, which found in 2017 that cranberry products significantly reduced. If you've got a relative risk of 0.675, that means there's a 32.5% improvement with regard to its effect on incidence of urinary tract infections. I mean, you're less likely to get them. Patients at some risk for urinary tract infections were more susceptible to the effects of cranberry ingestion, for the better. Again, I'm not going to read every word on my slides, but this is evidence that reaches a different conclusion than the Cochrane review, for what it's worth. So here are a couple of controversies about vegetables. Potatoes. We'll start with potatoes. You can see here there's a variety that's some kind of mix between red, those red jacket potatoes, and some form of white or yellow potato. And here is a reminder that not all potatoes are russets from Idaho. I mean, they come in different colors, sizes, shapes, nutrient values. Originally from Peru, many varieties, many colors. Potatoes are the #1 vegetable crop in the United States. Contrary to what some would postulate, they contain a variety of nutrients, vitamin C, potassium. They do have a higher glycemic index for some varieties and for some methods of preparation, less for others. The health value really depends a lot on how they're prepared. I mean, if you're frying them in oil and then, adding something else unhealthy on top of that, whatever it is, that's a problem. I've got a Live Science summary article here, which I'm not endorsing everything they say, but I think if you're looking at a somewhat balanced, if imperfect, view of potatoes, check that out. It's optional. But so many of the potatoes eaten in the so-called advanced industrialized countries look like this: French fries. And so that when you see data that shows that people who eat lots of potatoes have worse health outcomes, we're not talking about a baked potato in general. We're not talking about a baked potato with, let's say, salsa on top, something I like. We're talking about this. In a later lecture, I'll get into more about just how many French fries are being eaten in the United States. There's also a controversy about nightshades. Nightshades are a family of vegetables that include potatoes, tomatoes, eggplants, pepper, and tobacco. They are anecdotally linked to arthritis, especially rheumatoid. So there are lots of interesting stories which seem to show that at least for the individual telling the story, if they got off, whatever it was, tomatoes and potatoes, let's say, certain symptoms, perhaps arthritic symptoms, perhaps something else, improved. I would in no way deny the legitimacy of such stories. The question is, how generalizable are they? And what level of evidence is there indicating that they are anything other than a real statistical outlier? So, with regard to nightshades, there are strong anecdotes, there are various hypotheses, and unless something came out recently, there are no studies that verify that you need to avoid nightshades, or that the majority of the population needs to worry about this, particularly when tomato and potato are so high on the list of healthy and health value per dollar. So, okay, potato and tomato, both high on the list of most affordable nutrient-dense foods. There's a study on this here. I've got the reference. And this conclusion was based on 9 nutrients that should be encouraged, which include protein, fiber, various vitamins, various minerals, and 3 components that are recommended to be limited and which potatoes and tomatoes do not have, which are saturated fat, added sugar, and sodium, unless you add those to them. I mean, if you take a baked potato and slather it with sour cream, there you go. It's a different food. This is me wanting to show you my what I call the tomato forest in our backyard. These are tomato plants in our garden. We've got somewhere between 10 and 12 of these each year. They're not all that tall, but the majority of them are 10 or so feet high. We grow, I think my favorite really is called Sun Gold. It's these little orange ones. But we grow a whole variety of small and large tomatoes. There's an example. And moving on, one other controversy, so-called goitrogens, thyroid related in cruciferous vegetables. So it is true that there are components in cabbage and other cruciferous vegetables that inhibit uptake of iodine by the thyroid. That's not in dispute. And here are some examples of those foods. But, as I was saying earlier, these kinds of vegetables are at the top of the list in terms of anti-cancer effects. So, how do we deal with these competing narratives? I mean, how do we square the circle on this? The answer is that it usually, now look, there are some people who are diagnosed hypothyroid or close to it, for whom stopping eating these vegetables may really be helpful, or scaling back how much they eat. Some people may need to stop them altogether, but this is a very small number of people. Because unless someone is truly hypothyroid, what you need to be certain of, the strategy can be to include cruciferous vegetables, but make very, very sure that you have sufficient iodine intake. That sufficient iodine intake can mitigate or really eliminate, in many cases, adverse effects from cruciferous vegetables. So, as you know, there's iodized salt, which has its pros and cons. It's an interesting strategy to make sure that enough people eat iodine. Iodine can also be gotten from sea vegetables and sea animals. It can be gotten from supplements. Virtually every multiple these days has the minimum required amount of 15 milligrams a day of iodine. Cruciferous are nutrient dense. They're concentrated in the top half of scores on nutrient density. The CDC calls them powerhouse foods. And they have other positive qualities, which I have already mentioned and will not repeat. On that note, I bid you a fond farewell until Lecture 2 of this week, which is on nuts and seeds.